Tonight on NewsWatch, worry over Wall Street, why 2014 has begun on a bad note for the stock market. Plus, looking past politicians, how some are calling on God to end the crisis in Ukraine. And meet the man whose real-life story inspired the new movie Life of a King. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. And good evening, I'm Heather Sells. Stocks were slightly up tonight at closing. A little good news after the Dow's biggest loss in more than 7 months on Monday and a less than ideal January. But even with today's gains, there are questions about the strength of Wall Street. Caitlin Burke reports in tonight's top story.
It's been a rough ride for stocks so far in 2014. The market on a roller coaster. It's down more than 5% for the year already, and U.S. stocks have been hammered this week. The Dow Jones average dropped more than 300 points Monday, its biggest decline since June of 2013, and manufacturing dropped to an 8-month low. One reason for the market freefall, the weather. Cold and snow have forced small businesses to grind to a halt, and investors were unprepared for the big cost to companies during the unusually cold weather. Fresh signs of weakness in China also weighed on the minds of investors. Any signs of slowdown in China's economy, the world's second largest, can spell bad news because it's a key trading partner for developing countries such as South Africa and Indonesia. For now, most analysts think we're only seeing a temporary pullback in prices, but it isn't over yet.
I think investors are now worried that global economic growth could be hindered.
Analysts still expect stocks to rise in the longer term, calling Monday's action just a recalibration following record highs at the end of last year.
You have to keep it in context to the fact that we had a huge up year last year, and 2012 was a very good year. When you're up more than 100% and you give back 7%, it's not such a bad thing, right?
Still, it's a scary time for the average American family. The market plunge has the typical 401k down almost 6%. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
And Wall Street did end the day up. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 73 points. The Nasdaq was up 34. Debate over the debt ceiling is about to heat up again in Washington. Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew says after Friday, the government will start using extraordinary measures to keep paying its bills. That comes at the end of the month. The country will reach its borrowing capacity. Lew is calling on Congress to increase the debt ceiling, and many House Republicans are seeking concessions in exchange for any increase. And for more on this, we turn now to Phil Kerpen. He's the president of American Commitment, a group that advocates for limited government. And Phil, what will happen if Congress does not raise the debt ceiling and America can't pay its bills?
Well, there's some wiggle room on the official dates that come out of the Treasury, as we've seen from some of these previous confrontations. So there's no immediate short-term impact, but at some point the operations of government become very problematic if they've got all sorts of obligations, bills that stack up and haven't been paid, and so on. And so at some point, you've either got to raise it or you've got to have a dramatic cut in government spending, on something of the order of 40 or 50% overnight. And of course, that's not practical. And so at some point, they will raise it. But, when the real drop dead deadline is hard to say.
Right. And if they do, assuming they do eventually raise it, what's going to happen?
Well, we're going to continue piling up debt, and this is the real debate. It's not whether it'll be increased or not. It will be increased, but what Republicans have said the last couple of go-rounds of this is if we've got to pile up more debt, if we've got to keep racking up debt, at the same time we should be adopting reforms and cuts to spending so we're not right back in the same position again, in a year or two, as we have been over and over and over again. And so Republicans will try to attach reforms to this, cuts in spending or other policy priorities the Senate's been refusing to vote on. And the White House and Democratic position has been, hey, just take it, just add more debt, don't do anything to change the trajectory we're on. So that debate will happen again, as it has several times over the past couple of years, and we'll see where they end up.
And that trajectory that we're on right now of raising the debt ceiling, how does this affect average American households?
Well, it affects average American households because the national debt is now north of $17 trillion. That's going to continue to increase. Deficits are declining a little bit for the next couple of years, but they're going to start increasing again shortly after that as more baby boomers retire. And that debt that piles up, sooner or later, all of those bonds and all of those unfunded obligations are going to have to be paid back. And so that is the future tax burden on our children and grandchildren if we don't do something about it.
Phil, what would you like to see at this point in terms of resolving our fiscal problems? I'm assuming you're not in favor of continually raising the debt ceiling.
Well, I'd like to see the Boehner rule of dollar-for-dollar cuts in spending in exchange for any increase in the debt ceiling. Unfortunately, it looks like Republicans are going to be considerably less ambitious than that. They're talking about attaching either requiring the president to approve the Keystone XL pipeline, which would be a great victory for jobs in the economy, or some provisions related to health care, such as prohibiting a bailout of the insurance companies, which is something I would support, or possibly delaying the individual mandate, punishing people for not buying into this failed health care system. I'd also support that. I hope that they can use this as a mechanism to get some fiscal sanity and restored and at least force the Senate to vote on one of these measures because, of course, Harry Reid and the Senate's refused to even consider stuff like this. But it's going to take a lot more than that. We're going to need to overhaul a lot of these big federal programs and get them on a much more sustainable path. And unfortunately, that's not even on the table right now in these talks.
All right. Phil Kerpen, thanks as usual for your insights.
My pleasure.
And turning overseas now, protest leaders in Ukraine are seeking constitutional reforms to make changes in their government. Parliament took up those measures today. And meanwhile, protesters are still making their voices heard. And during all the political strife, Christians are spreading the gospel. George Thomas has more.
All eyes are on the Ukrainian parliament today as lawmakers debate the constitution as well as presidential powers. And while they meet, tens of thousands of Ukrainians continue to demonstrate on the streets of Kyiv, as they have done so since last November, demanding that the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, step down from power. This was as a result because he decided to rebuff on a multi-billion-dollar deal that would have brought closer relations with the European Union. This past Sunday, as thousands were gathering on Maidan, on Independence Square, the epicenter of the political crisis, hundreds of Christian volunteers also fanned out. They had a mission. They had 15,000 copies of the Gospel of John to hand out.
People are looking to the politicians to solve our crisis, but we're here to say it's not politics, but Jesus Christ who is the answer for Ukraine.
And since last November, the churches here in Ukraine have been actively involved. They've seized the opportunity to speak truth and hope into the political crisis. Churches have held 24-hour prayer vigils. They've conducted numerous evangelistic outreaches. CBN Kiev has been actively involved, as they have been for the last 20 years, using television and other evangelistic tools to share the gospel of Jesus Christ.
One of the things that's exciting to me is that we are not embarrassed to name the name of God, not embarrassed to name the name of Jesus Christ. We've got placards down there on Maidan of saying, pray to Jesus. Jesus has the future for our nation. And they're praying from the stage down there morning and night. They open up every morning with the Lord's Prayer.
CBN News had an exclusive interview with the former head of the Ministry of Defense here in Ukraine. He told me how encouraged he was by the role the church was playing.
All churches, all denominations, with no exceptions, they are here. They are spreading an important message on those barricades, and when the police started to attack, it was the Christians who stood and called for peace.
As I have spent time here on the streets of Kiev, meeting with demonstrators, but also more importantly with the church, they say they will continue to speak hope and lay the foundation, those biblical foundations that they pray will one day bring peace and prosperity to their nation. George Thomas, CBN News, Kiev, Ukraine.
The battle over gay marriage is playing out in a Virginia courtroom. A federal judge in Norfolk heard arguments today on whether the state's voter-approved ban on same-sex marriage is constitutional. Gay couples are suing to overturn the law. Virginia's newly elected Democratic Attorney General Mark Herring says he won't defend the ban. The religious group Alliance Defending Freedom is standing behind traditional marriage in the state.
And Virginians believe, as they always have, that every child has a right to know, be loved, and raised by the mom and dad that brought them into this world. That's an eminently reasonable argument. Marriage is ancient because it's reasonable and is dependent upon the diversity of the sexes, men and women, the complementarity of men and women, and that's why marriage laws are constitutional, and we believe they should be upheld.
Nationwide, activists are challenging more than a dozen state laws banning same-sex marriage. Scotland has passed a measure legalizing gay marriage. The Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill made it through Parliament in a vote of 105 to 18. The Scottish government says passing the measure was the right thing to do, even though it faced opposition from the Church of Scotland and the Scottish Catholic Church. The measure says religious groups cannot be forced to participate in gay marriages. And coming up, why the Sudanese president is seemingly waging war against his own people. A second round of peace talks between the South Sudanese government and rebel factions is set for Friday. A ceasefire is in place in that conflict. But in neighboring Sudan, the Islamist government has stepped up attacks, especially against civilians in the Nuba Mountains. Gary Lane reports.
Sudan's Nuba Mountains used to be a serene place, one where Muslims and Christians lived side by side in peace, eking out a living from farming. But this is their experience in 2014. For more than 2 decades, Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has waged war against the people of the Nubas and South Kordofan state. Muslims and Christians alike have resisted his efforts to Arabize and Islamize them. They believe he sees them as infidels. He wants to kill them and seize their oil. Sudanese Christian human rights activist Namia Ibrahim Shaloka says many Americans mistakenly believe that fighting ended in the Nubas when South Sudan gained independence nearly 3 years ago. He says the opposite is true. The war against his people is escalating.
Every day's daily air bombardment, destroying the school, even the facilities, health centers, churches, and everything.
According to the news service Nuba Reports, Sudan government bombings in the Nuba Mountains increased from 28 in November 2013 to at least 120 just 2 months later. Late last month, a barrage of 48 rockets hit a school and near the marketplace in the city of Kauda. While no one was killed, the Nubans were alarmed by Bashir's new preferred method of attack, parachute bombs. Parachute bombs are more deadly because they're much quieter and less noticeable when they fall from the sky.
It's just like totally focusing to destroy the life of the people, and they target even the civilians. They don't focus in anything else. This is the situation.
Religious freedom advocate Tina Ramirez of the nonprofit group Hardwired says Sudanese President Bashir is at the heart of every Sudan conflict, from Darfur to the Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile.
The conflict is not between Muslims and Christians, it's between Bashir and his version of Islam that's extremely oppressive and everybody else in Sudan. And that includes South Sudan. So he's constantly pitting groups off of each other and instigating problems even in South Sudan.
The International Criminal Court has issued a warrant against Bashir for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So far, the Sudanese president has avoided arrest.
And we're not doing anything to bring them in. So what can we do as the U.S.?
As the church or as non-governmental organizations, we can come alongside the people of Sudan to ensure that they have the training to articulate true human rights and freedom and to have a constitution that really respects that for everyone. Without religious freedom, there will be no peace in Sudan.
For Christians and Muslims alike, from Khartoum south to the Nuba Mountains. Gary Lane, CBN News.
For more from Gary, you can check out his blog, The Global Lane. You can find it at our website, cbnnews.com. Up next, CBN News sits down with actor Cuba Gooding Jr. to talk about his latest role and the man who inspired it. Murder is a leading cause of death among American teenagers. That fact led one man to spend more than 30 years trying to save lives, all by using a board game. His story is told in a new film starring Oscar winner Cuba Gooding Jr. In tonight's Focus Report, Ephraim Graham sits down with the star of Life of a King and the man who inspired the story.
Washington, D.C., home to more than 500,000 people and at least 1 million stories. This one begins at a little white house just 7 miles from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
This is the story of a chess club founded for inner city youth. It's different from most. It's distinguished and boasts of not just teaching chess but truth. It teaches young children to reason, to rationalize, to use good sense and intelligence against deception, treachery, and lies. So at the Big Chair Chess Club, we're on a mission to save the lives of our children, to teach the unteachable, reach the unreachable, and always think before you move.
Eugene Brown bought the old house in the early 90s.
Door's there. Tell him I'm on my way.
Then traveled to the city's toughest neighborhoods, recruiting kids to learn chess and join his club.
I'm going into my 3rd decade of teaching chess. And I can actually say that I think that I'm the one that brought chess east of the river in Washington, D.C.
Yet, this is more than just a game to the D.C. native. It's a lifesaver for the thousands who've sat down with him over the years.
Some of them never learn how to be real good chess players, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to get them to think before they move. You know, because I've seen too many kids make impulsive decisions that's ended up costing the rest of their life.
Impulsive decisions put Brown's son in jail for 16 years. His grandson is behind bars now. And despite his mother and father's love and hard work, Eugene did time too.
I must have did almost close to 20 years on layaway plans. A 7-year here, a 8-year here, a 6-month here.
We visited one of those stops where Eugene went after trying to hold up a bank for $3,200.
I went in Trenton State Prison in New Jersey in 1969. I was a young guy. I didn't know anyone in that prison.
Eugene Brown spent more than a dozen years locked up here at the New Jersey State Prison for that botched robbery attempt. They were among the toughest years of his life, but he still took solace in playing the game of chess.
That's how I did my time, on a chessboard. I've seen the Muslims, I've seen the Christians, I've seen the stick-up guys, I've seen everybody had their cliques, and my clique was chess, you know, and that's what I carried around.
The big change came when another inmate taught Brown to apply the game to his life.
I said, man, I lost. I didn't know. He said, man, you never lose. He said, you're either learning lessons or you're teaching lessons. Chess is the only game that can't be won. It can only be played, just like life.
3 stages of life. Your opening, that's when you're a young fella. The middle game, that's when you're like middle age. And the end game.
He's been sharing those lessons with children since his release. The work has earned chess awards, recognition from the city, and now his story moves to the big screen in Life of a King, starring Academy Award winner Cuba Gooding Jr.
Ah, yes, the pawns. They are the front line. They will be casualties.
Scrap's boring, man. Kids game.
It was really a wonderful experience to watch it the first time. And I think that's why I'm here talking about it like crazy.
Gooding compares this role to the noble characters he's played in films like Men of Honor, Red Tails, and Gifted Hands.
You are a man of faith and you make no bones about being a Christian.
That's right.
In Hollywood.
That's right.
One of the things we love about you.
Even though I'm surprised my pastor sees all my films. Because there ain't no commitment. Some of them movies ain't Christianly. Did you see Shadowboxing?
This film doesn't blatantly display faith, but surely you see it in the film.
No, it's God's will. It really is. And that's what's so cool about stuff like this, man. It's like, you know, I'm no saint in any way, and I make mistakes and I sin constantly. But it's my relationship I have. When you learn about people doing great things like this who have been incarcerated. It's easy to say, oh, he's a felon, he's an ex-con. But this is an ex-con who made a difference in the life of these kids who are now considered intellectuals, you know, and that connective tissue of society and life is what intrigues me. And I hope that, you know, people find healing in stories like this. King Perry it is. Now, King Perry has an army, and you're a part of it. But the problem is, you think you're out there doing the king's business, all you're really doing is sacrificing yourself. Like the pawn you truly are.
He ain't like that, B.
It's exactly like that, partner.
I didn't know I looked that good.
Brown loves the film, but says he can't take credit for this latest move in his endgame.
The only reason this movie was made, the only reason that I'm here is it's an ancestral blessing. You know, it's from my great-great-grandmother that probably prayed for us, my grandmother that prayed. I know my mother, you know. So this is all of those people that prayed, you know, for our family, for me.
And he thanks God for turning his tale of disgrace into a story of dignity.
Once you accept God, there's no limit to what you can do.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Washington.
Well, Life of a King is in select theaters now, and you can also get it at home through iTunes or Amazon. Up next, how one man gave up everything to serve those less fortunate. Well, finally tonight, would you permanently give up the comforts of your home to dedicate your life to help the homeless? Well, one man is doing just that. Tom McNamara is a retired teacher. He sold everything he owned to travel the country in his RV helping the homeless. During his time on the road, he's learned that one thing homeless people really need is socks.
Up here is roughly about 2,000 pairs of socks. I pull out a pair of socks and 90% of them will respond with one, a smile, or they'll go, oh my gosh, that's heavenly socks, are you kidding me? You know, this is better than anything I could have gotten today.
Tom spent the last year and a half traveling and serving. He's been to 17 states and he's given away thousands of pairs of socks. And that's all for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and your questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time.